Imagine a continent where leaders fail at every turn, while a fearless young soldier rises to reclaim Africa's dignity. Ibrahim Traoré isn't just fighting corruption, he's challenging a system that has failed millions. Meanwhile, South Africa's leaders stumble. The battle lines are drawn, and the question is clear: who will define Africa's future? Africa, the cradle of civilization, is a land of endless beauty and unimaginable wealth. Yet for centuries, it has been a battlefield of exploitation, corruption, and betrayal. To understand why leaders like Ibrahim Traoré are rising today, we must go back to history, because Africa's present struggles are rooted deeply in its past. When the European powers carved up Africa in the late 19th century during the Berlin Conference, they did not see people, cultures, or traditions. They only saw resources: gold, diamonds, uranium, oil, cocoa, coffee, and fertile lands became the obsession of foreign empires. For decades, France, Britain, Portugal, and Belgium drained Africa while dividing its people along artificial borders. Even after independence in the 1950s and 1960s, the so-called freedom was often only symbolic. Yes, African nations raised their flags and sang their anthems, but real power remained in the hands of foreign corporations, military bases, and puppet leaders. This new form of control was given a name: neo-colonialism. In the West African country of Burkina Faso, this story is painfully familiar. Once called Upper Volta, it remained under French domination until 1960. After independence, leaders like Thomas Sankara tried to bring real freedom by rejecting foreign control, promoting self-reliance, and demanding dignity for Africans. Sankara became a legend, Africa's Che Guevara, but he was assassinated. In 1987, reportedly with foreign involvement, his death sent a chilling message: bold African leaders would not be tolerated. Fast forward to the 21st century, Burkina Faso, like many Sahel nations, suffered from poverty, terrorism, and political instability. Corrupt politicians bowed to foreign masters while their people starved. It was in this environment that a young military officer named Ibrahim Traoré began to rise. At just 36 years old, he would become Africa's youngest head of state. In 2022, after leading a popular coup, Traoré's arrival on the scene was not just another military takeover. It symbolized something bigger. It was the rebirth of Sankara's dream, the continuation of Africa's struggle against colonial domination. But while Burkina Faso witnessed this bold rise far to the south, another story was unfolding, a story of decline and failure. South Africa, once hailed as the crown jewel of African liberation, was crumbling under the weight of corruption, inequality, and betrayal. The African National Congress, the party of Nelson Mandela, once represented hope for the entire continent. Mandela's release in 1990 and the end of apartheid in 1994 symbolized Africa's victory against oppression. But 3 decades later, the ANC has become a shadow of its former self. President Cyril Ramaphosa, once celebrated as a negotiator and businessman, now presides over a nation plagued by power cuts, record unemployment, corruption scandals, and growing hopelessness. Here lies the great contrast: Ibrahim Traoré, the fearless young soldier, versus Cyril Ramaphosa, the weak old politician. One symbolizes courage, resistance, and independence. The other represents compromise, corruption, and collapse. This documentary is not just about two men. It is about two different Africas. One Africa that dares to fight for its future, and another Africa that clings to failed promises of the past. One Africa that chooses dignity, and another that chooses dependency. To truly understand why Traoré has become a symbol of hope, while Ramaphosa is seen as a symbol of failure, we must look deeper into their histories, their choices, and the paths they represent for the continent. Because Africa today stands at a crossroads, and the decisions made now will determine whether it rises as a global power or continues to suffer under the chains of corruption and foreign control. This is the story of Ibrahim Traoré's bold example and Ramaphosa's failing ANC. This is the story of Africa's struggle, its betrayal, and its possible rebirth. Before Ibrahim Traoré rose to power, Burkina Faso was a nation teetering on the edge. Though rich in culture and history, it was plagued by poverty, political instability, and relentless foreign interference. The country's economy was fragile, dependent largely on agriculture and mineral exports. Small farmers struggled with unpredictable weather and poor infrastructure. The majority of the population lived on less than $2 a day. While the government promised development, little change reached the villages and towns outside the capital. Terrorism had become a major threat. Groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS exploited weak governance, attacking remote towns, displacing families, and killing civilians. The National Army, underfunded and overstretched, struggled to maintain control. Fear had become a daily companion for ordinary Burkinabe citizens. Political corruption was rampant. Successive governments promised reforms, elections, and prosperity, yet all failed to deliver. Public funds were often diverted to the pockets of elites. Infrastructure projects remained incomplete. Schools and hospitals were under-resourced. People had lost faith in traditional leadership and began yearning for a new generation of leaders. Foreign interference compounded the crisis. France, the former colonial power, maintained significant influence over Burkina Faso's military and economy. Military bases and foreign aid were presented as assistance, but in reality, they often undermined local autonomy. Citizens saw the paradox: foreign troops and foreign corporations claiming to help, while local people suffered. Civil society began to speak out, but the government ignored protests and dissent. The gap between the ruling class and the common people widened. The frustrations of the youth in particular were growing louder. Many young Burkinabés saw no future for themselves, neither in education, employment, nor political participation. In this context of despair, Traoré emerged not just as a military figure, but as a beacon of hope. He represented action, decisiveness, and vision. Whereas prior leaders had relied on negotiations, treaties, and foreign support, Traoré's approach was clear: defend the nation, assert independence, and put the people first. The contrast with South Africa became even more evident. While Burkina Faso's challenges were raw and visible, South Africa's decline was subtle yet equally destructive. In Burkina Faso, the people wanted change immediately. They were desperate. In South Africa, citizens had grown accustomed to broken promises, tolerating inefficiency, corruption, and stagnation. Traoré's rise was therefore not an accident. It was the inevitable result of decades of failure, political, economic, and social. His country needed a new kind of leadership, one that would challenge both internal corruption and external interference. The conditions before Traoré also reveal a broader truth about Africa. Across the continent, nations faced similar crises: young populations, weak governance, economic stagnation, and foreign influence. Burkina Faso was simply one example where the combination of crisis and courage collided to create a turning point in history. Before Traoré, Burkina Faso was a country waiting for a leader willing to act, not just talk. A leader who would refuse compromise with foreign powers, refuse to tolerate corruption, and refuse to abandon the people. That leader arrived in 2022, and his actions would send shockwaves across Africa. To understand the rise of Ibrahim Traoré, one must first understand the man himself, his childhood, his experiences, and the principles that guide his every decision. Ibrahim Traoré was born in 1988 in a modest family in Burkina Faso. From an early age, he witnessed the hardships of ordinary citizens: the struggle for basic necessities, the constant fear of violence in rural areas, and the frustration with corrupt local leaders. These early experiences shaped his worldview. A leader must serve the people, not themselves or foreign powers. Education played a crucial role in shaping Traoré. While formal schooling was limited, he showed a keen interest in history, politics, and military strategy. He studied the lives of revolutionary leaders: Thomas Sankara, Che Guevara, Patrice Lumumba, and absorbed lessons in courage, sacrifice, and uncompromising leadership. He understood that a nation could not rise without strong, decisive leadership rooted in principles, not personal gain. Traoré's military career began at a young age. He quickly distinguished himself for his discipline, strategic thinking, and ability to inspire soldiers. Unlike many career officers, he did not see the military as a tool for personal advancement or a stepping stone for political gain. Instead, he viewed it as a service to his nation and a responsibility to protect the people from both internal and external threats. His rise within the military ranks was marked by challenges. Burkina Faso's army was under-resourced and often demoralized due to repeated failures against terrorist groups in the Sahel. Yet Traoré's leadership style was different. He led from the front, earning the respect of his peers and the loyalty of the troops. Where others hesitated, he acted decisively. Where others compromised, he stood firm. Traoré's ideology is deeply rooted in Pan-Africanism and anti-colonialism. He believes that Africa must control its own destiny, free from foreign interference, exploitation, and manipulation. His speeches often emphasize self-reliance, youth empowerment, and national dignity. He challenges the notion that African nations must bow to foreign aid or influence, arguing instead that true independence comes from strong, principled leadership and self-determination. Beyond politics and military strategy, Traoré's personal life reflects his commitment to simplicity and integrity. Unlike many politicians and military leaders who amass wealth and privilege, Traoré maintains a modest lifestyle, demonstrating that leadership is about responsibility, not personal gain. This authenticity has resonated with the Burkinabe people and earned him respect across the continent. Traoré's rise is also a story of timing and opportunity. He stepped into power during a period of national crisis, a time when citizens were desperate for decisive action and principled leadership. His ability to act decisively, combined with his clear ideological stance, made him a symbol of hope not just for Burkina Faso, but for a generation of Africans frustrated with corrupt or weak leadership. Contrast this with South Africa's leadership. While Traoré's actions are bold and transparent, Ramaphosa's leadership is often cautious, compromise-driven, and reactive rather than proactive. Where Traoré sees urgency, Ramaphosa sees diplomacy. Where Traoré takes bold action, Ramaphosa negotiates endlessly. This stark contrast underscores the central theme of this documentary, the difference between courage and compromise, action and inaction, principle and corruption. Ibrahim Traoré is not just a military officer or a politician. He is a symbol, a living reminder that leadership rooted in integrity, courage, and vision can change the course of a nation. His story is still unfolding, but already it challenges the assumptions about what is possible in Africa. In January 2022, Burkina Faso witnessed a turning point. The country, plagued by insecurity, corruption, and public frustration, was ripe for decisive leadership. It was in this environment that Ibrahim Traoré, a young, bold, and principled military officer, stepped forward to change the course of history. Traoré's coup was not a random act of ambition. It was a calculated response to the mounting crises that had paralyzed the nation for years. Terrorist attacks were increasing in frequency and brutality, targeting civilians, schools, and government institutions. The army, despite its bravery, struggled due to lack of resources and mismanagement by political leaders. Ordinary citizens were losing hope as corruption, inefficiency, and foreign dependence weakened the state. When Traoré seized power, he did so with a clear message: no compromise with incompetence or corruption, no surrender to foreign influence, and no tolerance for the betrayal of the people. His actions reflected both courage and strategy. He moved quickly to stabilize the military command, remove ineffective leaders, and reassure the population that security would be a priority. One of his first bold decisions was to confront foreign influence head-on. French military presence, which had long been justified as anti-terrorist assistance, was increasingly seen as a source of control rather than protection. Traoré demanded accountability, transparency, and respect for Burkina Faso's sovereignty. This was a direct challenge to decades of neo-colonial dominance. and it sent a powerful signal across Africa. Burkina Faso would no longer accept external interference in its domestic affairs. Traore also prioritized the safety and morale of ordinary citizens. He toured affected regions, meeting displaced families, listening to the concerns of local leaders, and ensuring that relief and security operations were implemented swiftly. Unlike past leaders who remained distant and insulated, Traore was visible, accessible, and proactive. Another significant step was his restructuring of the National Defense Forces. Recognizing that a strong and disciplined military is essential for national sovereignty, he invested in training, equipment, and strategy, while simultaneously rooting out corruption and incompetence within the ranks. Soldiers under his command reported increased morale and confidence, motivated by a leader who shared their risks and vision. Traore's approach was also deeply inclusive. He emphasized the role of youth in shaping the nation's future, encouraging young officers and citizens alike to participate in rebuilding the country. By empowering the younger generation, he not only ensured fresh ideas, but also created a base of loyal, motivated supporters committed to national development. However, Traore's bold actions were not without risks. Seizing power in a fragile state can easily lead to backlash, both domestically and internationally. There were concerns about potential counter-coups, foreign retaliation, and the challenge of governing a nation under constant threat from armed groups. Yet Traore remained undeterred. His calculated confidence and clear vision allowed him to navigate these dangers effectively. Public response was overwhelmingly supportive. For the first time in years, ordinary Burkinabe citizens felt that their voices mattered, that their country was in capable hands, and that leadership could truly reflect the interests of the people. Traore became a symbol of hope, embodying the courage and decisiveness that had long been absent from the political landscape. Contrast this with South Africa, where leadership failures are often prolonged and tolerated. While Traore acted decisively, Ramaphosa's administration has repeatedly been criticized for delays, indecision, and compromise in the face of corruption and public dissatisfaction. This stark difference underscores the central theme of this documentary. Africa is at a crossroads, and leadership matters. Ibrahim Traoré's coup was more than a transfer of power. It was a statement of principle. It was a declaration that Africa can rise, that leaders can act decisively, and that the people's voice can no longer be ignored. His boldness would inspire not only Burkina Faso, but the entire continent. Ibrahim Traoré's rise was not only about taking control of Burkina Faso, it was about redefining Africa's role in the world. From the very beginning, he made it clear that his vision extended beyond national borders. Traore was not content with simply addressing domestic crises. He sought to inspire an entire continent to reclaim its sovereignty, dignity, and destiny. Traore's vision is deeply rooted in the principles of Pan-Africanism, a belief that Africa's strength lies in unity, self-reliance, and collective progress. He frequently cites historical leaders like Thomas Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, and Patrice Lumumba, emphasizing their commitment to African independence and continental solidarity. For Traore, Pan-Africanism is not a mere ideology. It is a practical strategy for achieving security, economic stability, and political influence. One of the central elements of his vision is self-reliance. Traore argues that African nations must reduce their dependence on foreign aid and influence, which often come with strings attached. He has been vocal in calling for economic policies that promote local industries, agriculture, and technology. For him, Africa has the resources, talent, and potential to thrive, but only if it is free to make its own decisions. Security and defense are also a key part of Traore's Pan-African agenda. Observing the persistent threats from terrorist groups in the Sahel and across the continent, he stresses that African nations must collaborate on intelligence, military training, and resource sharing. He envisions a coordinated effort among West African states to secure borders, protect citizens, and counter foreign interference. Traore's speeches often resonate with young Africans who make up the majority of the continent's population. He calls on the youth to take active roles in governance, civic engagement, and innovation. Africa's future is in your hands, he has said repeatedly. Do not wait for external powers to grant you freedom. Claim it yourself. These words have inspired a new generation of African leaders and activists who see themselves as stakeholders in shaping the continent's destiny. Furthermore, Traoré emphasizes the importance of cultural and historical pride. He believes that understanding Africa's past, its civilizations, struggles, and victories, is essential for building a confident and self-sufficient future. By promoting education, history, and African values, he aims to instill a sense of ownership and purpose among citizens. Economically, Traoré advocates for regional collaboration. He supports initiatives that encourage intra-African trade, joint infrastructure projects, and shared technological development. For example, he has expressed support for strengthening the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, arguing that continental markets can reduce dependence on foreign imports and foster sustainable growth. Traoré's vision also includes challenging exploitative foreign practices. He has taken firm stances against multinational corporations that extract resources without benefiting local populations. His policies push for fair agreements, accountability, and the protection of national assets. In doing so, he is sending a message. Africa will no longer be a passive participant in global exploitation. It will demand fairness, respect, and sovereignty. Contrast this with South Africa's leadership. While Traoré speaks boldly about self-reliance, independence, and youth empowerment, Ramaphosa's ANC often prioritizes foreign investments and external approval over domestic empowerment. Traoré's Pan-African approach is proactive, principled, and visionary, whereas the ANC's approach is often reactive, cautious, and compromised. Ibrahim Traoré's vision for Pan-Africanism is both inspiring and pragmatic. It combines idealism with concrete actions, courage with strategy, and national leadership with continental responsibility. For Africa, it represents a path forward, a roadmap for sovereignty, unity, and dignity. And for the continent's youth, it is a call to action, to rise, to lead, and to reclaim the Africa they deserve. To understand the contrast between Ibrahim Traoré's rise and Cyril Ramaphosa's failures, we must look south, to South Africa, a nation that once represented hope, resilience, and freedom for the entire continent. The story of the African National Congress, or ANC, begins not with compromise but with courage. The ANC was founded in 1912 as a political movement dedicated to ending racial discrimination, promoting equality, and achieving self-determination for black South Africans. For decades, it fought against the oppressive apartheid regime, often at tremendous personal risk. Leaders like Oliver Tambo, Albertina Sisulu, and Walter Sisulu laid the foundations for a movement based on principle, unity, and sacrifice. The global spotlight shone brightest on Nelson Mandela, whose imprisonment for 27 years became a symbol of resistance against tyranny. Mandela's steadfast commitment to justice, reconciliation, and nation-building inspired millions, both within South Africa and across the globe. His vision was clear: a free, democratic, and united South Africa where the rule of law, human dignity, and equality would prevail. In 1990, Mandela's release from prison marked the beginning of a new era. Negotiations with the apartheid government led to South Africa's first democratic elections in 1994, and Mandela became the country's first black president. The ANC, which had once been an underground movement, now assumed the mantle of government with overwhelming support from the populace. The initial years were filled with hope. Policies were introduced to redress historical injustices, including land reforms, affirmative action, and expanded access to education and health care. South Africa's economy, although challenged by decades of apartheid, began to stabilize. The ANC's leadership was celebrated for its ability to unite a deeply divided nation, heal old wounds, and lay the groundwork for progress. During this period, South Africa also became a symbol of African potential on the global stage. Mandela's moral authority and diplomatic skill earned the country respect internationally. Other African nations looked to South Africa as a model, proof that a nation could emerge from oppression and chart a path of self-determination, democracy, and economic development. Yet even during these glory days, challenges loomed. Inequality remained entrenched, and corruption was beginning to seep into political institutions. While Mandela maintained moral authority and public trust, cracks were forming beneath the surface. Subsequent ANC leaders struggled to balance growth with equity, transparency with political expediency. Nonetheless, the era of Mandela and the ANC's early governance represents a high point, a time when South Africa symbolized hope for Africa, demonstrating that principled leadership, resilience, and vision could achieve extraordinary results. It was this legacy that set the standard for what leadership could look like on the continent. Traore's rise in Burkina Faso echoes that legacy in spirit, though in a very different context. Where Mandela operated in a post-apartheid nation transitioning from decades of institutionalized oppression, Traore emerged in a country besieged by terrorism, foreign influence, and corruption. Both leaders, however, share a common thread: courage, decisiveness, and a vision for national dignity. The ANC's glory days remind us that Africa is capable of greatness. They remind us that principled, courageous leadership can inspire nations, heal divisions, and create hope. But they also serve as a benchmark, a warning of what is possible and what is at stake when leadership falters. While the early years of the ANC were marked by hope, progress, and moral authority, the subsequent decades tell a different story. A story of decline, corruption, and growing public disillusionment. South Africa, once the shining example of African leadership, began to stumble under the weight of its own internal failures. The turning point is often traced to the presidency of Jacob Zuma, 2009-2018. Initially celebrated as a populist leader with deep connections to grassroots movements, Zuma's tenure quickly became synonymous with scandal and mismanagement. Corruption infiltrated nearly every level of government, eroding public trust and undermining institutions. One of the most notorious examples was the Nkandla scandal, where public funds meant for national development were diverted to upgrade Zuma's private residence. Billions of rands were spent on luxuries, security enhancements, and private amenities, while millions of South Africans continued to struggle with poverty, unemployment, and inadequate services. During this period, state-owned enterprises became hubs for mismanagement and embezzlement. Eskom, the national power utility, faced mounting debt, operational inefficiency, and widespread electricity outages. Load shedding, the practice of scheduled blackouts, became a daily reality for citizens and businesses alike. The economy, though rich in resources, faltered under political mismanagement. Education and healthcare systems suffered as well. While the government promised reform and investment, execution was often slow, poorly managed, or corrupted. The youth, who had once seen South Africa as a land of opportunity, began to lose faith. Unemployment reached alarming rates, particularly among young adults. Millions felt trapped in a cycle of poverty with little hope for upward mobility. Corruption scandals continued to accumulate, including allegations of state capture by private entities and foreign-linked corporations. Courts, commissions, and investigative bodies revealed how public officials colluded with business interests, siphoning resources away from essential services. This systemic corruption weakened governance and created a sense of inevitability. Many South Africans began to expect failure from those in power. The ANC, once the party of liberation and moral authority, now faced a legitimacy crisis. Internal factionalism, patronage networks, and political infighting further weakened its capacity to govern effectively. Ordinary citizens, disillusioned with the repeated failures, turned to protests, strikes, and civil movements to demand accountability. Yet political reform often lagged behind public demand. This decline became a stark contrast when compared to leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, whose boldness and decisive action directly addressed corruption and inefficiency. Traoré's approach in Burkina Faso highlights a key difference. While ANC leaders negotiated, delayed, and often compromised, Traoré acted swiftly to protect the nation and serve the people. International observers also noted the decline. Once admired globally for its democratic progress, South Africa's reputation suffered as reports of corruption, inefficiency, and social unrest became frequent headlines. Investors became cautious, the economy slowed, and the dreams of the post-apartheid era seemed increasingly out of reach. The ANC's decline is a cautionary tale. It shows how power without accountability and leadership without integrity can erode even the most inspiring legacies. For millions of South Africans, it transformed hope into frustration. For the continent, it served as a warning. No nation, however glorious its past, is immune to failure if leaders lose sight of principle and duty. When Jacob Zuma stepped down in 2018, hope emerged that South Africa could restore its moral and political standing. Cyril Ramaphosa, once celebrated as a successful businessman and anti-apartheid activist, assumed the presidency. Many expected a revival of accountability, economic growth, and renewed public trust. Yet nearly 5 years into his leadership, South Africa finds itself facing crises that threaten both its stability and credibility. Ramaphosa entered office with a reputation for negotiation and pragmatism. He promised anti-corruption measures, economic reform, and transparent governance. However, despite his intentions, his administration has struggled to translate promises into results. Many critics argue that he is constrained by internal party factions, political compromises, and a reluctance to confront entrenched corruption within the ANC. One of the most glaring scandals during his tenure is the Fala Fala farm robbery controversy, where millions in foreign currency allegedly went missing. The incident raised serious questions about transparency, accountability, and ethical leadership at the highest level. While the case sparked widespread debate, Ramaphosa's response has been cautious and non-confrontational, fueling criticism that he prioritizes political survival over decisive action. Meanwhile, South Africa continues to grapple with chronic unemployment, particularly among youth. More than a third of young adults are out of work, and economic opportunities remain limited. Ramaphosa's policies, though occasionally ambitious, have yet to produce tangible improvements in the lives of ordinary citizens. Public frustration has grown into protests, strikes, and social unrest, highlighting the gap between political rhetoric and lived reality. Electricity crises further exacerbate the problem. Eskom, the national power utility, continues to suffer from mismanagement, corruption, and technical failures. Frequent load shedding disrupts businesses, schools, and households. Ramaphosa's administration has struggled to implement sustainable solutions, leaving citizens questioning his effectiveness. Comparing this with Ibrahim Traoré's leadership highlights a stark contrast. While Traoré acted decisively to stabilize the military, assert national sovereignty, and restore public confidence, Ramaphosa's administration often appears reactive, hesitant, and bound by political expediency. Where one leader embraces boldness and transparency, the other negotiates endlessly, often at the expense of public trust. Ramaphosa's handling of economic policies has also faced criticism. Initiatives to attract foreign investment, while necessary for economic growth, are often viewed as favoring elite interests over the needs of the majority. Critics argue that this approach mirrors the compromises of past ANC administrations, failing to address structural inequalities or empower ordinary citizens. Additionally, internal party dynamics have limited his ability to implement reforms. Factionalism, patronage networks, and resistance from within the ANC impede decisive action. Unlike Traoré, who consolidated authority to act swiftly, Ramaphosa navigates a political landscape that often forces him to compromise, delaying much-needed reforms. Public perception reflects these failures. Many South Africans, particularly the youth, view their leadership as disconnected, ineffective, and self-serving. The contrast with Traore, whose decisive actions and personal integrity inspire loyalty and hope, underscores the central theme. Africa's future hinges on leadership. Courage, vision, and accountability matter more than words or titles. Cyril Ramaphosa's tenure illustrates the dangers of cautious, compromised leadership. While intentions may be noble, execution has faltered. And in a continent where bold, principled leadership is rising, his failures are starkly visible. The comparison is inevitable, and the lesson clear. Africa cannot afford weak leadership when its people demand courage, integrity, and action. Across the African continent, a new wave of change is unfolding. From Burkina Faso to Mali, Niger, and Guinea, bold leaders are emerging, challenging corruption, foreign interference, and the failures of old political systems. Africa stands at a crossroads, and the choices made today will define the fate of millions for decades to come. In recent years, the Sahel region has seen a surge of military-led transitions, often framed as coups. While coups are controversial, they reflect deeper systemic failures. Governments unable to protect citizens from terrorism, manage resources, or uphold accountability. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso demonstrate that decisive, principled leadership can emerge from crisis. The examples are clear. In Mali, young leaders overthrew ineffective governments to address terrorism and corruption. In Niger, political shifts reflected a rejection of leadership that failed to provide security and prosperity. Even in Guinea, citizens and military actors demanded change in the face of entrenched autocracy. These movements, while complex, highlight a central truth. Africa's people, especially the youth, are no longer willing to tolerate weak or corrupt governance. Yet the continent is divided. While some nations embrace bold leadership and reform, others remain mired in compromise, dependence on foreign aid, and internal corruption. South Africa exemplifies the latter. Despite immense potential, the country struggles with leadership failures, economic stagnation, and societal frustration. International influence further complicates the picture. Western powers continue to intervene, whether through military aid, economic agreements, or political pressure. While some interventions provide necessary support, others perpetuate dependency and limit the sovereignty of African nations. Leaders like Traoré have confronted these pressures directly, asserting that national interest must always come first. Economic independence is another critical challenge. Many African nations rely heavily on foreign loans, imports, and multinational corporations that exploit natural resources. Traoré's Pan-African vision advocates for intracontinental trade, local industry, and resource sovereignty. By fostering self-reliance, he aims to reduce dependence on foreign powers and create a sustainable path for growth. The youth of Africa play a central role in this crossroads. More than 60% of the continent's population is under 25, and millions are educated, tech-savvy, and politically aware. They are demanding accountability, jobs, and opportunities. Traoré's policies resonate with them because they promise not just stability, but empowerment and agency in shaping Africa's future. However, challenges remain formidable. Terrorism, climate change, economic inequality, and entrenched corruption continue to threaten progress. The path of bold leadership is risky, requiring courage, strategic vision, and the willingness to confront powerful interests, both domestic and foreign. The comparison with South Africa is instructive. Where countries like Burkina Faso embrace action and accountability, South Africa hesitates. Leadership here is cautious, constrained by politics and compromise. For Africa as a whole, the contrast offers a warning. Bold, principled leadership can lead to sovereignty, stability, and respect. Weak, indecisive leadership risks stagnation, dependency, and growing disillusionment. Africa is at a crossroads. One path leads to sovereignty, unity, and prosperity under leaders who act with courage and principle. The other path leads to stagnation, compromise, and continued dependence under leaders unwilling or unable to prioritize their people. The choice is not just political, it is existential. For the continent's youth, its citizens, and its future, the time to decide is now. As we reach the conclusion of this story, one fact becomes undeniably clear. Leadership matters. Africa's future is not determined by its resources alone, nor by its history, nor even by its struggles. It is determined by the courage, vision, and integrity of those who lead. Ibrahim Traoré represents the possibilities of bold, principled leadership. His rise in Burkina Faso demonstrates that decisive action, accountability, and a commitment to the people can transform a nation. Traoré acts with urgency because he understands the stakes. He leads with integrity because he believes the nation's destiny depends on trust, transparency, and courage. His actions are a reminder that leadership is not a privilege. It is a responsibility. Contrast this with Cyril Ramaphosa's South Africa, where leadership, though well-intentioned at times, has often been constrained by political compromises, internal factionalism, and a failure to decisively address corruption and inefficiency. Citizens are frustrated, the economy struggles, and public trust erodes. While Traoré inspires hope and mobilizes his people, Ramaphosa struggles to maintain the faith of those he governs. This contrast is not just about two leaders. It is about two Africas. One is rising, daring to claim its sovereignty and dignity, and inspiring a generation to take action. The other is faltering, mired in compromise, dependency, and the inertia of broken promises. Traoré's Africa is bold, proactive, and principled. Ramaphosa's Africa is hesitant, cautious, and compromised. For the youth of the continent, this contrast offers both warning and inspiration. It warns against complacency, corruption, and tolerance of weak governance. It inspires engagement, activism, and leadership rooted in integrity. Young Africans are reminded that they are not passive observers. They are participants, agents of change, and the inheritors of the continent's future. Traoré's example emphasizes that Africa can rise if it chooses leaders who embody courage, decisiveness, and vision. It shows that sovereignty, self-reliance, and dignity are achievable goals when leadership prioritizes the nation over personal gain or foreign approval. It also demonstrates that youth empowerment, military integrity, and principled action are essential components of national resurgence. Meanwhile, Ramaphosa's failures illustrate the consequences of weak leadership. Delayed reforms, compromised ethics, and failure to confront entrenched corruption lead not just to economic and political stagnation, but also to the erosion of public trust and national morale. For citizens, it is a painful reminder that good intentions alone are insufficient. Action, courage, and accountability are non-negotiable. The broader lesson is clear. Africa's destiny hinges on its leaders. Citizens must demand integrity, courage, and accountability. Nations must prioritize sovereignty, self-reliance, and unity. The youth, armed with education, awareness, and determination, must rise to claim their place in shaping the continent's future. Ibrahim Traoré's rise is a beacon of hope, a demonstration that bold, principled leadership can change the course of history. Cyril Ramaphosa's struggles are a cautionary tale, a reminder that inaction, compromise, and corruption come at a heavy cost. The contrast between these two leaders offers Africa a choice, one path of courage, dignity, and sovereignty, or another of hesitation, dependence, and disappointment. The time to act is now. For the people of Burkina Faso, for the citizens of South Africa, and for the millions of young Africans across the continent, leadership is not an abstract concept. It is the foundation of their future. Leaders like Traore show what is possible. Leaders like Ramaphosa remind us of the stakes, and the responsibility ultimately lies with the people to demand better, to act decisively, and to ensure that Africa's next chapter is one of freedom, dignity, and power. The question is no longer whether Africa can rise. The question is whether its citizens will rise to claim the leaders, the vision, and the future they deserve. If you like this video, please subscribe our channel and tell us in the comment box which country and city you are watching this video from.